Well, I'm with Steve Groff from Cover Crop Solutions. And Steve, we've been talking about cover crops and things farmers should consider. There's an awful lot of interest in cover crops these days. What kind of things should farmers be thinking about when they're thinking of just getting in and starting with cover crops right from the get-go?
Well, one of the things I like to tell people is, what is your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? And that could be a whole host of things. And then when is your planting window? What is the time of year that a certain cover crop is ideal to plant? And the third thing that's important too is, are you as a farmer, are you willing to take the necessary steps in educating yourself to be able to do it correctly? So one of the easier cover crops is using the tillage radish, because if you get it planted early enough in the fall and it grows up, it takes up nutrients and it goes down in and opens up your soil, and then it winter kills, particularly in most areas of the country. And so there's nothing you have to do with it in the spring. So it's very easy to manage. So we call it the cover crop with training wheels. And that's a good place for farmers to start. Then as farmers learn to do that, to get with using other cover crops, either mixing them with the radish, cover crops that will overwinter, like annual ryegrass, for instance, then those cover crops will continue to grow through the winter and will keep and retain your nutrients that are in your soil a little longer in the spring. But then there's a management component in the spring in controlling them that you need to learn about how to do it correctly. So it's kind of an evolution when you get in cover crops of starting simple with what you're comfortable with and then moving on from there.
What kind of, should they put as much emphasis on the cover crop and the management and everything as they do with their cash crop of corn and soybeans?
Well, yeah, and you kind of tapped into a key concept I like to promote, and that is if you treat your cover crops like you treat your cash crops, you're going to stand a good chance of being successful. And I think farmers too often treat their cover crops as an afterthought. It's just a cover crop. And you probably won't get results from that. You may get lucky sometimes, but if we got to look at cover crops as part of the overall system in not only year to year, but multiple years. How do they affect your cropping system? And that's a mindset that farmers have to understand. You need to be ready to plant your cover crop the first day it's ready to plant, just like you are with corn or soybeans. Every farmer's ready the first day it's fit to plant in their area. Same with cover crops. You're going to maximize their use. You're following the combine in the fall, or you're doing other things to get them planted and established earlier, but you are really having that whole mindset of treating them just like you do your cash crops.
Here in central Iowa, if you're a corn and soybean farmer, when should you be looking at the optimum seeding time for a cover crop?
Well, the optimum seeding time for a wide range of cover crops is historically early, before a lot of our crops are harvested. So that's kind of a conundrum, if you will. But in the first half of September, if you can have some early season corn, early season beans you can get off early, that's a sweet spot. You have options with the tillage radish and your ryegrass and so forth. As we move into September and then into October, then we're down to triticale or Schiller rye. And they're able to be planted a little bit later in the season. So you need to be prepared. 2012 is an example where our harvest was earlier because of the drought. And areas that did get a shower rain in early September, you had an opportunity there to plant cover crops in good time. Last year, 2013, we had our crops planted later. They weren't off the fields as early, so you didn't have that much of a planting window. Cover cropping is not black and white. It's about being an opportunist and being ready for that planting window, which will never be the same from year to year usually. So it's being ready for the opportunity.
How about in the spring when you're coming back, planting the main cash crop? What's the optimum time for terminating the cover crop to make sure that you plant into a clean, seed bed free of all the green vegetation and what have you that can gum up your planting?
Yeah, it's not an exact science, but there's some few rules to follow. If you're going into the spring, obviously if we have something like tillage radish in Iowa, for instance, it's going to be dead. So you don't have to worry about that. But if you have a living cover that came through, then you have a management decision. And if it's on the dry side and looking to be dry, you want to be sure you kill it early, maybe 2 weeks before planting, I will just say. If it's on a wetter side, like it was last year in 2013, You may not be able to get in that field to control it, and sometimes that gets farmers worried. But if you're able to get your corn planted and get it sprayed off, that will work. But you have to understand that when you have a grass-type cover crop, it's taken up nitrogen at that moment. And assume there's very little nitrogen at that time. And you want to make sure you get a bit of nitrogen on early so that corn can get off and start growing. That factor doesn't matter as much with soybeans. But this is a part of understanding how the whole management of cover crop works. So if you have something like tillage radish that winter killed, it's going to be releasing its nitrogen early. And you can maybe hold off a little nitrogen early and then apply later to side dress and so forth. So these are some of the nuances, some of the management things that experienced cover croppers have found out, and to be able to have someone who's just starting out, they need to understand some of these dynamics to be successful.
Is there anything else that a farmer who is thinking about planting a cover crop should consider?
Well, I think it comes to educate yourself. That's probably one of the biggest challenges in cover cropping, to learn, educate, learn all you can. Go to field days if there's any in your area. Talk to farmers if you can. If you know of someone in your region, talk to them. To me, that's going to be the best thing that's going to make you a successful cover cropper, to learn all you can, and then start small. Start with what you're comfortable with. There's a lot of euphoria these days with cover crops. I don't recommend farmers go out and try to do half their farm in cover cropping. That's just, let's make our mistakes small and then build upon that. The data has shown for surveys that farmers from the last 5 years who have started cover crops have almost quadrupled their acreage over a 5-year time. And I think that's a healthy growth curve, that you start small and go from there.
Well, thank you, Steve. For agriculture.com, I'm Gil Gullickson.